Now we're going to move to part 2 of our webinar. And this is more of the technical side of the webinar. So Teresa first will explain a little bit, just very briefly, about what the UN Committee on World Food Security is, the CFS, and what the CSM, the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples mechanism is, what the structure is, and the mandate of these spaces. This is a very complex space, so we'll just be giving a brief overview, but there's lots to learn and there's lots of resources online. After Teresa's presentation, then Julia and Nadia will explain a little bit more about how your organizations and movements actually participate in the CSM, in the work of the CSM through the working groups. And then after that, we'll have time to answer a few questions. So while you're listening to the next 3 presenters, if you have any doubts, any questions, any comments, please write them in the chat box. And we'll have time for 2 or 3 questions after the presentation. But if we don't get to everyone's questions, please rest assured that we will have future meetings and times to discuss all of your questions and doubts. So if we don't call on you, then please forgive us, but there'll be time later. So thanks very much. I'll hand over to Teresa now.
Thank you, Anissa. I hope I will be brief. As Anissa was saying, the CSM, the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples mechanism for relation with the Committee on World Food Security has a very complex name, and that is already a bit fuzzy sometimes. But it's first of all a platform, it's a space. The CSM was generated as an outcome of years of struggles of the social movements and people's movement, indigenous peoples movement towards the institutions that are dealing with the global food governance. And after years and years of struggling from outside the doors of where decisions were taken through the different World Food Summits until the meetings of the Committee on Food Security, when the committee was part of FAO. FAO is the United Nations body that is based in Rome and works on the policies on agriculture. They decided that it was enough. And they start progressively mobilizing to say, nothing about us without us. So we don't want governments taking decisions about ourselves as fisher folks, as pastoralists, as small-scale food producers, as agricultural and food workers, as women, as youth, as urban food insecure, as consumers, as indigenous peoples. We don't want anybody taking that decisions on our behalf. We want to be there. If policies needs to be made about food security and nutrition, we are the one feeding the world as small-scale food producers, because we are producing the 70% of the food that is consumed for worldwide. It's not the multinationals, are not the long chain, global value chain of the supermarkets, it's us. And with this strong push that based on the paradigm of food sovereignty, so to ensure the right for each community, individual and peoples to nurture themselves and have self-determination over their food systems, they manage, thanks also because of an alliance of governments that were friendly to the demands of the movements, to ensure that the Committee on Food Security could be reformed in 2009 and could be radically transformed, bringing to life a unique platform in the United Nations systems where there are multiple actors on the table of the policy decision making. And that's why in 2009, under the premises of the past financial crisis and the food prices crisis and the riots springing all over the regions in the world, under that pressure, the CFS acknowledged the need to profoundly reform the global food governance and to profoundly anchor that reform on a human rights basis, and particularly anchor its reform towards a vision on the progressive realization of the right to adequate food. And that was an amazing success, because that opened the door of the policy dialogue to the social movements and to the small-scale food producers that could now speak on their own behalf with their own voices about the political demands and priorities of their own communities and on their territories in a way that it was not like this in the past. Therefore, the CFS underwent this profound reform and managed to establish this multi-actor space. In the UN language, many times the CFS is addressed as a multi-stakeholder platform. That it's something that in the CSM we don't agree that much, having a human rights lens reading of it. And therefore, because we believe that not all actors are peer, the private sector is also engaged in this platform, as is the academia and other UN bodies. But the small-scale food producers gathering and the movements gathering under the space of the CSM are the right holders, are those who have, bringing the rights to the CFS narrative, while the others are third parties or duty bearers, like governments. In this case, the paradigm of bringing the food sovereignty paradigm into the CFS reform was very difficult and challenging. And that's why in that moment, what it was possible to achieve was to ensure that the paradigm of food security and nutrition could guide this committee, always enlightened by its vision of realizing the right to food. In order to ensure the participation to this open space that the movements were able to open in 2009, in 2010, the CSM managed to self-organize itself and to present itself by establishing a space which is the largest space worldwide on these topics, but has a very, very narrow scope, only dealing and interfacing with the CFS. So the role of the CSM is to gather all these constituencies that I've been mentioning and all the subregions and bringing all the demands from the territories from the ground and bringing it to the CFS and into the institutions. And we do that basing ourselves on an autonomous way of self-organizing that is respected by the CFS. So we are an essential part of the committee, but we self-organize ourselves, giving particularly voice and space of those that are most affected by food insecurity and malnutrition, but are also the same who are most contributing to our food security, and based on the key principle of facilitation, which also helps to overcome the power dynamic and asymmetries and the lines of privilege and oppression that we all bring our subjects into the struggles and into the institution policy dialogue. The CSM, it's an open and inclusive space. Everyone who's dealing with such matters is very welcome to come and join the space. So this is a bit part of how the CSM work. Of course, there is a lot more to be said about the diversity of the CSM and how it is structured. It is only to conclude worthwhile to mention that the CSM, I mean the individuals who are joining the organizations, that are interacting and inhabiting the CSM space represent far more than 380 million smallholders, family farmers, agriculture and food workers, fisher folks, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, consumers, urban food insecure, women, youth. So you can imagine the magnitude of this space and the fact that this space do not, because it's an open space and it's not in an organization of organizations, it's just a huge space of dialogue, facilitation and interaction where we can consolidate our own positions coming from the ground and bringing it to the CFS to ensure that the outcomes the CFS will deliver in the topics inherent to food security and nutrition will concretely realize the right to food and will concretely change and transform the existent. Thank you.